The fog clung to the coastal cliffs like a shroud, swallowing the world in muted grays as Nina's car wound up the narrow drive. Her breath fogged the windshield, a fragile barrier against the chill that seeped into her bones, not just from the autumn air, but from the hollow echo of her own thoughts. Why this job? She wondered, her mind a quiet storm of doubt, fingers tight on the wheel as if gripping control could mend the cracks from her past. The mansion emerged like a ghost from the mist, its peaked roof jagged against the dim sky. As she stepped out, the gravel crunched underfoot, a lonely sound swallowed by the waves crashing below. Then from the shadowed porch, a low growl rumbled, eyes glinting like embers in the gloom. Shadow unseen, but felt his presence a warning wrapped in silence. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of aged oil paint and dust, each breath stirring memories not her own. Nina flicked on a lamp, its weak glow casting long shadows across the cluttered studio canvases leaned against walls like forgotten sentinels, their surfaces scarred with unfinished strokes, as if the artist had been interrupted mid-confession. The floorboards creaked under her steps, echoing her own tentative heartbeat, while outside the fog pressed against the salt-crusted windows, blurring the line between sea and sky. In the corner, a locked drawer sat unassuming in an antique desk, its brass handle dulled by time. There, Shadow lay coiled like a spring, his grizzled fur rising slightly, ears pinned back in vigilance. His scar's faint lines across his muzzle caught the light, mirroring the jagged edges of the half-painted seascapes around him. Nina's gaze lingered. The room felt like a vault of secrets, the drawer its beating heart and Shadow its unyielding guardian. She shivered, not from cold, but from the way the space reflected her own locked-away regrets, the isolation wrapping around her like the mist outside. Nina's hands paused over the stack of yellowed sketches, the paper whispering against her skin like ghosts of accusations. Why am I here? The question looped in her mind, a relentless tide eroding the walls she'd built since that courtroom betrayal when a client's forged signatures had shattered her career, leaving her to sift through others' messes while avoiding her own. She straightened, but her shoulders sagged under the weight of unspoken regrets, the mansion's dim light carving hollows in her cheeks. Shadow's stare from across the room pierced her, his unmoving form a mirror to her own stillness, as if he too carried invisible chains. Her breath hitched not in sobs, but in a quiet unraveling. Fingers trembled as she catalogued a brush crusted with dried pigment, each stroke a reminder of creativity she'd abandoned. The fog outside muffled the world, just as she muffled her heart numb, efficient alone. Yet Shadow's scars, faint under the lamplight, tugged at something deep, a flicker of recognition that threatened to crack her facade. She turned away, busying herself with a ledger, but the silence screamed louder, her isolation a cold companion pressing in like the sea's endless roar below. As Nina gathered her notes, preparing to seal the mansion's secrets behind her for the night, Shadow stirred subtly, his head lifting just enough for his amber eyes to lock onto hers, a gaze not hostile but probing, as if weighing her worth. The creak of a floorboard upstairs echoed faint yet deliberate, sending a prickle down her spine. Was it the wind or footsteps of an unseen intruder? She hesitated at the door, key in hand, the fog swirling like unspoken promises. Shadow's tail flicked once, a whisper of invitation or warning, pulling her back into the web of mysteries. Something shifted in the air, a hint of cologne perhaps, or just her imagination, but it promised upheaval, a life-changing unraveling hidden in the shadows. In the quiet hours before dawn, Nina's mind often drifted back to the sunlit offices of her early career, where laughter echoed off polished desks and trust was as easy as a handshake. She had been vibrant then, a rising estate lawyer with a knack for untangling legacies, her days filled with clients who saw her as a confidant, not a mark. But that illusion shattered one rain-slicked afternoon in court when a client's forged will documents she'd verified in good faith unraveled before a judge's gavel, the betrayal slicing deeper than any verdict. The client, a supposed friend, had manipulated her signatures, leaving her reputation in tatters and her heart armored in skepticism. Now, years later, she navigated the world like a ghost, taking on isolated cases like this artist's estate, to rebuild in solitude, her once open smile reduced to a tight line. As she stood in the mansion's studio, sorting through faded photographs, A snapshot of the artist with shadow caught her eye, man and dog eyes locked in unspoken loyalty. It stirred a pang, a reminder of what she'd lost the ability to believe in anything without proof. Shadow shifted nearby, his watchful gaze echoing her own wariness, as if he too knew the cost of misplaced faith. Nina set the photo down gently, her fingers lingering the past a fog that blurred her path forward, leaving her to wonder if some wounds ever truly healed. In the hush of the mansion, Nina and Shadow existed as echoes of each other, their emptiness a shared canvas stretched taut across the room. She moved with deliberate slowness, her hands gliding over the artist's ledgers, but her mind wandered to the voids within years of isolation after her betrayal. Friendships withered like unpainted sketches, her heart a locked drawer, much like the one Shadow guarded. He in turn lay motionless, his amber eyes tracking her every step, his body a statue of wariness scars hidden beneath fur that no longer gleamed. When Nina paused to sip water from a cracked mug, Shadow's ears perked subtly, a mirror to her own flinch at a distant wave's crash. Both flinched from noise, from intrusion, their defenses woven from the same thread of loss. She caught herself staring at him, noting how his tense posture mimicked her crossed arms, a barrier against the world. In a rare moment of stillness, as dust motes danced in a sliver of light, Nina knelt nearby, not too close, and whispered a nonsense word, testing the air between them. Shadow didn't growl, but neither did he approach. Instead, he exhaled a soft sigh, his flanks rising and falling in rhythm with her own suppressed breaths. This nonverbal dance built bridges in silence. Her hesitant glance met his guarded stare, recognition flickering like a candle in fog. The mansion amplified their solitude, its creaks a chorus to their inner monologues, hers of regretful what-ifs, his of loyal vigils unbroken. Yet in this mirrored emptiness, a fragile thread emerged. Nina felt a pull, an unspoken understanding that their wounds, though different in form, bled the same quiet despair. As the afternoon waned, Shadow shifted an inch closer to her workspace, his warmth a tentative offering while she left a scrap of food nearer than before, their paths converging in subtle steps towards something resembling solace. Shadow's world had always been one of shadows, born in a kennel where loyalty was bred like a weapon. He was sold young to the artist, a reclusive man who saw in the pup's sharp eyes a kindred spirit for guarding secrets. Trained meticulously, Shadow learned to conceal valuables, keys tucked under his paw. Sketches rolled and hidden in his bed, his body a living safe amid the mansion's chaos. The artist whispered commands in the dead of night, rewarding him with scraps of affection, forging a bond as unyielding as steel. But loyalty came at a price. Thieves had come, once drawn by rumors of the artist's hidden fortune, their boots stomping through the fog-shrouded estate like predators in the mist. Shadow had fought then, teeth bared in a frenzy of protection, his fur torn by grasping hands and makeshift weapon scars etching his flank like abstract strokes on a canvas. One thief's knife had grazed his muzzle, leaving a jagged line that twitched in damp weather, a constant reminder of betrayal, not just by intruders, but by the world that demanded his vigilance without mercy. Now with the artist gone, Shadow lay by the locked drawer, his grizzled coat matted from neglect, muscles coiled in perpetual tension, a low growl rumbling like distant thunder whenever footsteps approached. His eyes, once bright with purpose, now held a haunted depth, survival instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. He ate sparingly, slept lightly, his body a fortress against the void left by his master's absence. Nina watched him from afar, her cataloging paused as she traced the parallels, his scars external, hers buried deep, both forged in the fire of misplaced trust. Shadow's obsessiveness over the drawer wasn't mere habit. It was a lifeline, the last command echoing in his bones, protect this always. In the mansion's dim light, his posture spoke volumes. Ears flicking at every creak tail, still as stone, a guardian burdened by ghosts. His silent pain a mirror to the artist's unfinished works, incomplete and aching. She wondered in her quiet thoughts if he dreamed of those thieves, their shadows lurking, or if, like her, he simply endured, waiting for a sign that trust could return. The fog outside whispered against the windows, amplifying his isolation. As Shadow shifted ever so slightly, his gaze meeting hers, for a fleeting moment, a spark of recognition in the emptiness. In the hush of the mansion, Nina and Shadow existed as echoes of each other. Their emptiness, a shared canvas, stretched taut across the room. She moved with deliberate slowness, her hands gliding over the artist's ledgers, but her mind wandered to the voids, within years of isolation after her betrayal. Friendships withered like unpainted sketches, her heart a locked drawer much like the one Shadow guarded. He in turn lay motionless, his amber eyes tracking her every step, his body a statue of wariness scars hidden beneath fur that no longer gleamed. When Nina paused to sip water from a cracked mug, Shadow's ears perked subtly, a mirror to her own flinch at a distant wave's crash. Both flinched from noise, from intrusion, their defenses woven from the same thread of loss. She caught herself staring at him, noting how his tense posture mimicked her crossed arms, a barrier against the world. In a rare moment of stillness, as dust motes danced in a sliver of light, Nina knelt nearby, not too close, and whispered a nonsense word, testing the air between them. Shadow didn't growl, but neither did he approach. Instead, he exhaled a soft sigh, his flanks rising and falling in rhythm with her own suppressed breaths. This nonverbal dance built bridges in silence. Her hesitant glance met his guarded stare, recognition flickering like a candle in fog. The mansion amplified their solitude, its creaks a chorus to their inner monologues, hers of regretful what-ifs, his of loyal vigils unbroken. Yet in this mirrored emptiness, a fragile thread emerged. Nina felt a pull, an unspoken understanding that their wounds, though different in form, bled the same quiet despair. As the afternoon waned, Shadow shifted an inch closer to her workspace, his warmth a tentative offering while she left a scrap of food nearer than before, their paths converging in subtle steps towards something resembling solace. The storm descended like a veil of fury thunder rumbling through the mansion's bones as rain lashed the windows, blurring the fog into a chaotic haze. Nina froze in the studio, her cataloging forgotten, as Shadow erupted from his vigil. A fierce growl tearing from his throat, his paws scraping the floorboards near the locked drawer. He paced in tight circles, body low, and hackles raised, his amber eyes wild with an urgency that sent a jolt through her chest like lightning illuminating hidden fractures. The drawer, once innocuous, now pulsed with significance. A faint scratch mark gleamed under the flickering lamp, as if clawed in desperation, a silent scream etched in wood. Shadow's behavior shocked her, pawing at the brass handle, then retreating with a whine, his scarred muzzle twitching as wind howled through cracks in the walls. The air thickened with the scent of wet earth and ozone, mirroring the storm brewing in her mind. This wasn't mere possessiveness, but a plea, a guardian's last stand against oblivion. Nina's heart pounded, the visual assault pulling her from her numb routine, the dog's frenzy a mirror to the chaos she kept locked away. Outside, waves crashed like accusations, urging her closer, the moment a precipice where detachment threatened to shatter. Nina's hand hovered inches from the drawer, the storm's roar echoing her internal tumult, a battle waged in the shadowed corridors of her mind. Logic screamed retreat. Why risk entanglement when every past involvement had ended in forgery's sting? Trust crumpled like discarded sketches. Her thoughts spiraled. This dog's obsession could be nothing a distraction from her methodical life, yet empathy whispered otherwise, tugging at the scars of her own betrayals. Shadow's stare burned into her, almost pleading, his body still now, but tense, a coiled spring of unspoken stories that mirrored her guarded heart. Self-preservation clashed with curiosity, her breath shallow as rain drummed like insistent fingers on glass. Involving herself meant vulnerability, the kind that had once left her shattered. But the scratch mark taunted a clue, begging revelation, and Shadow's low whine pierced the din, tipping the scales. Despite the fear gnawing her gut like fog choking the cliffs, she exhaled, decision crystallizing. She would dig deeper, logic yielding to the pull of compassion, a fragile bridge over her abyss of doubt. With the storm's fury as her unwitting accomplice, Nina knelt before the drawer, her fingers trembling like leaves in the gale, gripping a letter opener from the desk, its edge glinting like a reluctant promise. Shadow froze, his growl fading to a watchful silence, body rigid as if carved from the mansion's own shadows. She wedged the tool into the lock, the wood splintering with a sharp crack that echoed her heart's fracture. It wasn't clean. the brass-mangled shards scattering like broken trust across the floor. Inside, amid dust and forgotten trinkets, lay a rolled canvas fragment. Edges frayed painted with cryptic symbols, a swirling fog over a key-shaped cliff, incomplete yet insistent. Nina unrolled it carefully, her breath catching at the artist's signature scrawled in faded ink, a whisper from beyond. Shadow inched closer, his nose twitching at the scent of old paint, but he didn't lunge. Instead, his eyes met hers in cautious assessment, a tentative truce in the chaos. The act felt impulsive, a leap into the abyss she'd long avoided, the drawer's violation mirroring her own guarded heart pried open. Rain pounded the roof like applause or accusation, but there was no turning back. The fragment clutched in her hand bound her to the mystery, an irreversible thread weaving her fate with the dog's silent vigil. Her mind raced with possibilities, the puzzle's pull stronger than fear, as Shadow exhaled softly, his tension easing just enough to signal the shift from stranger to reluctant ally. In the storm's waning growl, Nina set the canvas fragment aside, her gaze drawn back to Shadow, whose body still hummed with residual tension scars, etched like lightning across his fur. Impulsively, she reached into her bag for a half-eaten sandwich, ham and bread. Nothing special, but offered on an open palm extended toward him, the gesture messy with crumbs tumbling to the floor like confessions unspoken. He hesitated, ears flattening, a low rumble escaping as if debating the cost of acceptance, his amber eyes flickering with the ghosts of past betrayals. Nina's internal voice urged retreat, don't push, don't care, but she held steady, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and her own quiet desperation. Slowly Shadow approached, nose quivering, then snatched the morsel with gentle teeth, retreating to his spot by the splintered drawer, chewing deliberately while watching her. It was imperfect, this bridge, no triumphant wag, just a subtle relaxation in his posture, a sign of fragile trust, budding like fog lifting at dawn. The days blurred into a rhythm of fog and faint light, filtering through the mansion's grimy windows, where Nina and Shadow navigated each other like ships in a misty harbor, close yet worlds apart. She worked at the desk, sifting through stacks of sketches, her movements deliberate, avoiding the corner where he lay like a sentinel carved from night, his grizzled fur blending with the shadows pooling on the floor. Shadow's growls were low rumbles, not aggressive but insistent, a barrier woven from years of solitary duty. When she approached too near the drawer, his lips curled just enough to reveal teeth worn from guarding secrets, his amber eyes narrowing into slits of caution. The air between them hung heavy with unspoken histories, the scent of old varnish mingling with the salt from the sea, a sensory veil that amplified their mutual isolation. Nina's internal monologue churned, "Why push? He's just a dog, a remnant of someone else's life." Yet his presence tugged at her, a reminder of her own fortified heart built brick by brick after betrayal's storm. She respected the distance, leaving water bowls untouched from afar, her glances brief laced with curiosity veiled as indifference. As the fog thinned one morning, revealing slivers of sunlight that danced like hesitant promises on the studio floor, Nina noticed Shadow's paw swollen, a fresh cut from splintered wood, perhaps mirroring the invisible gashes in her soul. She approached slowly, a cloth soaked in warm water clutched like a white flag, her heart pounding with the vulnerability of the act. Inside her thoughts whispered fears of rejection, echoes of clients who had turned her kindness into weapons. Shadow stiffened, a low whine escaping as she knelt at a respectful distance, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the earthy scent of his fur. He didn't snap, but his body quivered, eyes locked on hers in a silent plea, or warning his pain, a tangible shadow that resonated with her own suppressed wounds, the betrayal that had left her emotionally limping. Gently she dabbed the wound, her touch feather light, murmuring nonsense words like "easy now," just like mending a torn page, her voice a bridge over their shared abyss. The afternoon light slanted through the mansion's windows like fractured memories, casting elongated shadows that danced across the studio floor as Nina reached for a chipped porcelain cup on the desk. A relic of the artist's, its handle snapped clean off. Her fingers brushed the jagged edge, and suddenly the room dissolved into flashback, the courtroom echo of a gavel, her client's smug grin as forged papers scattered like shattered trust, the cup in her mind's eye slipping from her grasp that night, crashing in her empty apartment. She flinched, the real cup tumbling, now rolling toward Shadow's corner with a clatter that pierced the silence. He stirred not with a growl, but a soft bark, sharp yet inquisitive, his head cocking as if echoing her inner turmoil. The sound yanked her back, her breath catching. In that moment, Shadow's eyes met hers, a pause heavy with unspoken kinship, his own scars seeming to pulse in the dim glow. Nina knelt to retrieve the fragments, her hands trembling, and Shadow didn't recoil. Instead, he inched forward, nose twitching at the shards, a gentle nudge against her wrist, like a tentative anchor. As dusk painted the studio in hues of amber and indigo, Nina crumpled a scrap of canvas, once a failed sketch, now a makeshift toy, and tossed it lightly across the room, the paper fluttering like a wounded bird before skidding to Shadow's paws. He eyed it warily, at first, body tense as always, but then his tail flicked a subtle betrayal of curiosity, and he pounced with unexpected grace, batting it back toward her with a paw that sent it spinning. Nina's laughter bubbled up unbidden, a sound foreign in the mansion's hush, warm and unguarded, like sunlight piercing fog. It echoed off the walls, softening the edges of her isolation, her cheeks flushing with a forgotten joy. Shadow paused, ears perking, his amber gaze locking on her as if the laughter were a new language, one that spoke of safety rather than threat. The moment unfolded in layers of warmth. The scrap chased again, Shadow's movements playful yet cautious, his scars fading in the motion, while Nina knelt, extending a hand with a treat cheese from her lunch, offered palm up, no demands. He approached slowly, nose quivering at the scent, and took it gently, teeth grazing her skin like a whisper, his tongue rough but tentative. The space between them shrank, the mansion's chill retreating as if chased by this spark. Nina's internal walls thawed, memories of betrayal dimming in the glow of his acceptance. Outside, the waves softened their roar, a lullaby to their budding ease, and Shadow settled closer, his flank brushing her knee, a quiet claim of territory turned companionship. Laughter lingered in the air, a first flame kindling hope, turning the studio from tomb to haven, fragile, yes, but alive with the promise of warmth shared between two souls emerging from shadow. Twilight draped the mansion in veils of indigo, the fog outside whispering secrets against the panes, as Nina hunched over a cluster of canvas fragments, piecing them like shards of a forgotten dream. Her mind a whirl of symbols and shadows. Exhaustion weighted her shoulders, the day's discoveries, a swirl of paint hinting at hidden maps, stirring echoes of her own buried vulnerabilities, tears pricking unshed as she traced a line that mirrored her life's jagged path. Shadow had been a silent observer all afternoon, his form a dark silhouette in the corner. But now, in the quiet hush, broken only by the distant waves, he stirred paws, padding softly across the creaking floor, each step deliberate like a bridge extending over an abyss. Nina froze, breath caught as he approached unbidden, his grizzled head lowering to rest against her thigh, warmth seeping through her jeans like a balm on frost-bitten skin. His body leaned in a heavy sigh, escaping his muzzle scars, brushing her hand, as if offering them up for understanding. No growl, no tension, just surrender. His amber eyes lifting to meet hers with a depth that pierced her core. The mansion's peace fractured under the weight of encroaching dusk, the fog thickening like a shroud as Shadow's body tensed beside Nina, his ears pivoting toward unseen whispers in the wind. He had been calm moments before, but now his posture shifted. Hackles rising subtly, a low growl vibrating through his frame like a prelude to thunder, eyes fixed on the shadowed corners where lamplight flickered uncertainly. Nina paused her puzzle work, a chill skittering down her spine. Inside, her thoughts raced. What's wrong? As Shadow barked sharply at nothing, a sound laced with primal urgency, his body coiling as if sensing ghosts from the mist. The mansion's door rattled under an insistent knock, the sound slicing through the fragile peace like a blade through fog, and Nina's pulse spiked as she peered through the peephole. Arthur, his smile slick, as oil eyes glinting with calculated charm. Shadow's reaction was instantaneous. A volcanic surge, his body launched from her side hackles, a ridge of fury, a deafening bark exploding from his throat as he charged the door paws skidding on wood teeth, bared in a snarl that vibrated the air. Nina's hand flew to her mouth, panic flooding her veins like ice water. Not now, not him, her mind reeling with flashbacks of her own saboteur, the courtroom's cold betrayal mirroring this intrusion. Arthur's voice oozed through the crack. "Just here to discuss the estate, dear Nina." But Shadow recognized the timbre, the scent perhaps carried on the wind, triggering a torrent of trauma visions of past thieves' boots, kicking the artist's shouts, blending with Shadow's yelps in a cacophony of violence. Night cloaked the mansion in inky depths, the fog a living entity pressing against the windows when the back door splintered with a crash. Arthur, crowbar in hand, his face twisted from charm to malice, eyes locking on the drawer like a predator on prey. Recognition ignited instantaneously. Shadow's body went rigid, a primal growl ripping from his chest as memory surged this man, one of the thieves from years ago. The artist's cries, blood on fur, his hackles rising like spines launching forward in a blur of motion. Nina's scream pierced the air. "No!" As she stumbled between them, her heart a thunderous drum, the canvas fragments scattering like leaves in a gale. Arthur's swing went wide, the crowbar glancing off a table, shattering a vase in an accidental cascade of shards that mirrored the chaos unfolding. The standoff crackled with tension, Arthur's breath ragged. "Hand over the will or I'll take it," his voice a venomous hiss, while Shadow circled, teeth snapping inches from flesh, protective fury, unchecked eyes blazing with the fire of past abuses relived. The mansion exhaled into stillness as Arthur's footsteps faded into the fog, the splintered door hanging askew like a wound, half-healed shards of vase glinting on the floor amid scattered canvases. Nina slumped against the wall, breath ragged her side, throbbing from the fall, regret coiling in her gut like smoke. Why didn't I lock the back? Why trust the quiet her mind, a whirlwind of self-reproach, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks? Shadow retreated to the shadows first, his body trembling from the exertion, hackles slowly lowering, but eyes still darting a low whine escaping, as he licked a fresh nick on his paw, the physical separation, a brief chasm in their bond. The air hung heavy with the acrid scent of fear sweat and splintered wood, the fog outside muffling the waves to a distant murmur, amplifying the silence that enveloped them like a shroud. Nina's internal monologue churned. "He's hurt because of me, this legacy pulling us into danger." Yet she crawled toward him, hand extended, whispering, "It's over. For now." Shadow hesitated, body rigid, but then bridged the gap, pressing his flank against her, his warmth seeping through like a promise unspoken, fur damp with exertion. They sat in that hush, her fingers burying in his coat, tracing scars that mirrored her own invisible ones, regret softening to resolve as she vowed inwardly, "I'll protect you, protect this, all of it." The threat lingered in the creaks of the house, Arthur's shadow a ghost in the mist, but their closeness reaffirmed trust. Shadow's head resting on her knee, a silent anchor, his breathing syncing with hers in rhythmic calm. Physical separation dissolved into unity, the moment closing a traumatic chapter with a quiet pledge, mutual guardians now bound by survival's forge. Nina wiped her eyes, the mansion's dim light casting their entwined forms in soft glow, a tableau of resilience amid lingering dread, the fog swirling outside like unresolved echoes. But here in this silence, hope flickered anew. Dawn crept through the fog like a thief, pale light filtering into the studio where Nina knelt amid the canvas fragments, her fingers piecing them together like fragments of a shattered soul. The emerging image, a stylized map of the cliffs, dotted with symbols leading to a hidden cove, whispering the artist's final secret. The true will buried there, a testament etched in stone. Her heart quickened, internal thoughts racing. This is it, the key to everything, but why hide it? So a mix of exhilaration and dread, the puzzle's lines blurring with her own life's tangled paths. Shadow paced beside her, his agitation mounting, ears alert and twitching at every rustle, body low as if scenting predators in the mist, a soft growl rumbling like distant thunder foreshadowing the storm. The mansion amplified the unease, creaks in the floorboards, mimicking footsteps, the fog pressing against windows like prying eyes, the salty tang of sea air sharpening senses to a knife's edge. The mansion's front door burst inward with a splintering cracked fog swirling in like malevolent spirits as Arthur stormed through his face, a mask of desperate fury, a glint of metal in his hand, a knife, its blade catching the dim lamplight like a promise of finality. "The will's mine now," he snarled, eyes wild with greed, advancing on Nina where she clutched the completed canvas map, her back against the desk, heart slamming as the threat crystallized. No more games. This was survival, the air thick with the scent of salt and menace. Shadow's growl escalated to a thunderous bark, body launching between them, but Arthur swung wildly, the knife grazing air inches from fur, forcing Nina to dodge her foot, catching on a loose floorboard, tumbling her toward the open window where cliffs dropped sheer to crashing waves below. Panic surged. "I'm going to fall." Her fingers scraping wood as she teetered on the edge, the fog-muted roar of the sea, a siren's call to oblivion. Arthur's boots thumping closer, his breath ragged with triumph. In the vortex of chaos, with fog clawing at the edges of the room and the knife's edge hovering like fate's decree, Nina's world narrowed to a singular pulse choice, raw and irrevocable. Her eyes darting from Arthur's snarling face to Shadow's bloodied form, loyalty etched in every trembling muscle. Inside her thoughts collided. Run, fight. Save him, the betrayal of her past, surging like adrenaline, transforming fear into fire. She couldn't lose this guardian, this mirror to her soul, not to forgery's shadow. With a cry that shattered the tension, Nina lunged not away, but forward, grabbing a heavy easel, swinging it like a battering ram into Arthur's side, the wood cracking against bone in a resounding thud that sent him staggering, knife clattering to the floor. The act was decisive, a protector emerging from the wreckage of her guarded heart, her body shielding Shadow, now breath-heaving as she stood over him, map clutched in one hand, the other extended like a ward. The sirens faded into the fog like distant echoes leaving the mansion, wrapped in a hush that felt both merciful and oppressive. The splintered door barred temporarily with a chair, its legs scraping softly as Nina shifted it into place. She moved with deliberate slowness, each step a measured breath, the adrenaline's crash leaving her limbs heavy, as if the sea below had pulled at her bones. Shadow lay on a makeshift bed of scattered blankets, his shoulder wound clean now after her trembling hands had dabbed it with antiseptic from a dusty first aid kit, bandaged in white gauze that stood stark against his grizzled fur. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and the faint acrid bite of iodine mingling with the ever-present salt from the mist seeping through cracks. Nina sank to the floor beside him, her back against the wall, the cool wood grounding her as waves of emotional void washed over regret. For the violence, relief, and survival, a hollow ache where fear had raged. Morning unfurled in the mansion like a canvas, slowly revealing its hues, the fog lifting to let slivers of sunlight dance across the floor, warming the space where Nina and Shadow began their quiet dance of recovery. She rose first, movement steady and deliberate, fetching fresh water from the sink, its drip echoing in the hush, and placing the bowl near him, not too close, her eyes meeting his in a prolonged gaze that spoke volumes without words, amber depths reflecting her own weariness, a silent acknowledgement of shared scars, both visible and veiled. Shadow lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring at the scent, and lapped slowly, his tongue's rasp a sensory anchor in the calm, while Nina sat cross-legged nearby, unwrapping a granola bar to share crumbling bits onto her palm, and extending it gradually, the gesture small, but laden with intent. He hesitated, body still bandaged and stiff, but then inched forward on his belly, the motion interwoven with her patient weight, their behaviors mirroring her breath held as he sniffed his tail, giving a faint twitch when he accepted the morsel, rough tongue grazing her skin like a tentative promise. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the mansion's windows in golden farewell, Shadow rose unbidden, his bandaged shoulder shifting with a soft rustle, amber eyes locking onto Nina's with an intensity that stole her breath steady, unwavering, a gaze that held no remnants of fear. He nudged her hand gently, muzzle warm against her palm, the motion deliberate, intimate, his breath syncing with hers in warm puffs that carried the scent of earth and fur, a silent summons to rise. Nina stood, fingers lingering on his head, feeling the subtle tremor of release in his frame, her own heart unclenching like a fist opening to light. Together they stepped toward the door, side by side, his flank brushing her leg in rhythmic harmony, paws and feet moving as one across the threshold into the fading fog. The ocean's roar softened to a murmur below, waves lapping like applause for their quiet rebirth. The drawer and its secrets behind them now unlocked not by force, but by this singular act, total trust embodied in stride. Eyes forward, breaths entwined, fear's shadow dissolving in the shared path ahead.